Rinadapi sunichena tarorapi sahishnuna amanina manadena kirtanaya sadaharihi. This is a beautiful verse, and I'll give the translation in a moment. But first I just want to talk about the verse itself. This was written by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was a very great sage, very great saint. He was a liberated being. He was an Avesha avatar. He was the personification of God's grace, of God's love. He lived from, I believe, approximately 1486 to 1532, so about 500 years ago or so. He only lived to be 48 years old, but he personified what it meant to love Krishna specifically. And he was brilliant. He was a logician. He was part of the Nyaya school, what's called the Nyaya school. He taught logic. He had his own school where he taught logic to people. So very, very intelligent person. However, in his life, he only wrote 8 verses. Interestingly, 8 verses. This collection of 8 verses is known as Shikshashtakam. Shiksha means teaching, Ashtaka means 8. So the 8 teachings. So this verse I just recited in Sanskrit is one of them, and I think it's the most beautiful. And very specifically, it deals with what is the proper frame of mind that one must have in order to engage in meditation, and the highest of all meditations, which is Harinama meditation, meditation upon the names of God. One must recite the holy name of God in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than a straw in the street, more tolerant than a tree, offering all respects to others and devoid of all sense of self-prestige. In such a state of mind, one can recite the holy name of the Lord constantly. That is the translation of this verse. A very beautiful verse. And again, more than anything, even though it's addressing several things, including what is the nature of humility, really what it is doing is explaining to us what we should be feeling and what our attitude should be when we are engaging in meditation, such that we can maximize the experience of meditation. You know, with every spiritual practice that we do, we can do a spiritual practice in such a way where we're doing it by rote. We'll start with the worst and go on to the highest. We can do a spiritual practice in such a way where, again, we are doing it just by rote, meaning we're just kind of repeating the way a parrot repeats. You see, it's interesting. You can take a parrot and teach the parrot to recite the name of God, but the intentionality is not there. The parrot doesn't know what it's saying. You know, the parrot is just repeating Krishna, 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 the way it could repeat Paliwana cracker. You see, it's just doing it by rote. The intentionality, the attitude, the goal, the choice to focus on this as a name of God is not there. The understanding is not there. Thus, the parrot will not achieve self-realization or God-realization. You know, human beings also can do spiritual practices by rote in such a way where, again, it seems like we're doing something. You know, sadly, for many of us who have been to Hindu temples, we've seen priests who will do a ritual, and we see that as they're doing the ritual, they're looking around to see who's coming into the door. It's one of my pet peeves. It drives me crazy. I actually chastised a priest in Chicago once because we knew each other. And I said to him, because he was doing a puja to Venkateshwara, who is another form of Narayana, to simply be born human in the human form of life is the greatest blessing. To be born in such a way that you even know, you even have an inkling of what is God, of what is Narayana. To then have had the blessing in your life to be a priest doing a puja to Narayana. I said to him, when you do this puja to Narayana, don't look around to see what donors just walked into the door. You only look at this murti, you only look at Narayana, and you focus with complete devotion with everything that you're doing. And he took it the right way. He was shocked at first when I said that to him, because apparently no one had ever told him that. And after that he did. He never did a puja like that again, kind of looking around, oh yeah, what am I offering next? No. After that he focused. Well, again, one can do spiritual practice in such a way where, again, you're not focusing. It's just kind of meaningless. It's just an empty ritual. whether it's meditation, puja, mantra, anything. Or you can do it with that proper understanding, or more. The highest is we can perform our spiritual practice with devotion and with humility, which really are synonymous because you can't have one without the other. No one without devotion has real humility, and no one without humility can ever have devotion, can never have bhakti. So truthfully, they're the same. They're simultaneous. Thus, what this verse is very wonderfully explaining to us is what is the internal process that is occurring within the yogi, within the meditator, as they are doing the highest meditation that is possible, and that is meditating on the names of God. They have absolute and utter humility. What this means is, and we won't go through the entire verse just due to lack of time, Chaitanya mentions several things. He says being more tolerant than a tree. That's one of my favorite things that he says in this verse, actually. Because you remember maybe a week or two ago, I forget when, I spoke about how an individual who has the ability to both understand but also see what is the nature of Sri Guru understands that Guru is all around us, really. Because we can learn from anyone, we can learn from anything. And we can also learn from the trees. Here, Chaitanya gives this example of how we must be more tolerant than a tree. When we meditate on the nature of a tree, what do we see? We see a being who is alive. Every tree is alive. It is alive. It has Atman. It has a soul. And that soul is just as good as ours. But what do we see? We see a being who has complete tolerance. It rains on the tree. It snows on the tree. Children come along and will maybe kick the tree. You know, does the tree complain? Does the tree get angry and furious? You know, pick up its roots, start chasing that child. You know, what did you do? Try to get revenge. No. The tree is tolerant. The tree is tolerant. In fact, what does the tree do? The tree is a gift to the entire world. The tree gives of itself to the world. It gives shade to anyone who comes and takes shelter of it. If it's a fruit-bearing tree, it has these wonderful fruits that people will come and take the fruits of the tree and enjoy and have nourishment. Well, in a way, we're also meant to be like this. We are meant to be tolerant. We are meant to offer all of our respects to all of the beings when we see them. What does this mean? This means in all three ways in which we can engage in activity. It means that we offer respect in our mind, with our words, and with our actual actions. These are the three ways, Vedically, in which we act upon the world. It means everyone we encounter, we don't necessarily have to quite literally touch their feet and say namaste. You know, that's only one mode of activity. But at least, let's say we encounter someone and we barely have the time to even talk to them, at least in our mind, we have to be respectful. We have to offer our obeisance. We have to understand, in offering our obeisance, that who are we offering our obeisance to? Not just the external. In fact, not the external at all. We are offering obeisance to the internal, to who that being actually is. You've heard me say this. This is why we say namaste, namaha te, namaste. We say, I offer my obeisances unto you. What a civilized way of greeting each other. Instead of, hi, how you doing? You know? I'm looking forward to the day when all of humanity says, namaste. I offer my respects unto that being who is within you, that eternal Atman who is there within you. What a wonderful way of greeting each other. Well, at the very least, in our mind, we should be thinking this, that we are offering our respects to all beings, and again, to who they truly are within. You know? We know, of course, that very few beings are perfect. Very few beings are perfect. Whether it's even our own parents, whether it's relatives, whether it's friends, anyone we encounter, that's all right. We're not. That's why I say we are not necessarily offering our obeisances to the external of what they are, but we're seeing beyond that, into who they truly are within. You see. What else can be said about this verse? One can recite the holy names of the Lord constantly. In such a state of mind, one can recite the holy names of the Lord constantly. what we see is that very often individuals who even are trying on the spiritual path very often will come to the point where they'll have a practice and they'll do their practice for some time, but eventually they start to get bored. Eventually their mind just can't take it anymore. You know, oh, what, again, another day I have to sit and do my meditation? Oh, you know, I have better things I can do. You know, it's interesting. Prabhupada actually would give this example, that at first, when we are doing a sadhana, and I think our people here experience this a little bit less, but for the typical person, let's say, at first when we're doing a spiritual practice, it can taste like poison. If you do it long enough, however, it then begins to taste sweet. What is meant by this? In other words, the idea that, okay, now I have a vow, now I have a practice, and every day, come anything, come, you know, rain or high water or snow or whatever, I sit and I do my mantra for a certain period of time. At first, this can seem like a very dry thing to do. It can be a difficult thing to do. It's a discipline. And have we not seen that with any discipline, at first, it can seem like poison. But if we keep doing it, if we keep doing it, if we keep doing it, it becomes sweeter and sweeter and sweeter until it becomes simply our nature to do that discipline.
Like the violinist who has to think where to put their fingers and how to hold the bow, and eventually sweet music.
Exactly. Exactly. With any discipline, at first, we have to make ourselves do it. It's not easy. But then in time, what seems like something poisonous, oh no, I have to sit and I have to do this again, in time becomes sweetness. And in fact, we look forward to it. Well, in this verse, Chaitanya is explaining how it is that we can transform that poison into sweetness, such that we can now recite the names of God constantly. You know, that's the first thing, is that he's explaining that with this humility, the sweetness becomes more and more bright. It becomes more and more strong. The other thing is this, that with this attitude of devotion and of humility, what also happens is it comes to the point where the name of God is always there. We are reciting the name of God either consciously or unconsciously. It's interesting. This is the Turiya. This is the fourth stage of mantra meditation. You know how I always talk about the initial three stages of mantra meditation. We say the mantra out loud, then we whisper it. That's the second stage. Then the third stage is it's in our mind. The fourth stage is a stage that few people speak about. That's the Turiya stage, where it becomes internalized. And the mantra is always there. The name of God is always reverberating in our very being itself. That ultimately happens. Okay. Now, having said this, I want to talk just a little bit, very briefly, about the nature of humility. Because unfortunately, again, we being in the Kali Yuga, not having much wisdom, not having much experience, not having much practice, not having much motivation to even do any of the above, many of us have a very skewed idea of what's meant by humility. Humility is not the same as humiliation. They sound the same. They may share the same root in whatever it is, Latin or whatever. I don't know the etymology of the two words. They are literally opposite, however, of one another. By humility, what is meant is having a healthy understanding of what is our true position in reality and our true state. That's all. So in other words, humility is another word for self-realization. Very simple.
Freedom from fear?
Yes, oh yes, definitely freedom from fear, absolutely. That's one of the results of humility. Now, humiliation, on the other hand, or whatever you want to call it, self-abnegation, there are many, many different words for this. An unhealthy kind of sense of self, that, oh, I am not worthy of anything. That's not what we're talking about. That is something that's unhealthy and honestly as egotistical as pride. A lot of people don't know this, but a person who just beats themselves up all the time is as egotistical as someone who does the opposite. Because both people are trying to get attention. And both people have a wrong impression of who and what they are. And that's ego. So this is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about someone who allows themselves to be abused. We're not talking about someone who allows themselves to just be stepped on. We're not talking about someone who allows themselves to be used, manipulated in any way whatsoever. That's a fool. That's not someone who has humility. This is why when we look at the stories, the biographies of actual sages, what do we find? We find that, interestingly, things that in our initial stages of spiritual development seem like paradoxes are reconciled in the lives of such beings. So in other words, what does it mean to, on the one hand, have humility, but on the other hand, be strong? That seems like a contradiction. That's because we're new. When we look at the life of a saint, we see both of those reconciled perfectly. When we see the Buddha, what do we see? We see someone who certainly had humility, utter humility, someone who was a sage, but someone who was a king and who spoke like a king, someone who spoke with authority. That's why they called him the Chakravartin, because he was an emperor, spiritual emperor. When we look at the life of Jesus, we see someone who said, "Oh, turn the other cheek," but who also went into the temple in Jerusalem, and when he saw that people were exploiting the temple and just trying to use it to make money, he grabbed a stick and he chased them, beating them. Oh, well, Jesus must have fallen into illusion for a little while. No. No. In the sage, both are reconciled. You can have utter humility, but at the same time, believe me, you are the strongest being on earth. A sage is a being who is so strong that when the true sage is present, all other beings run to that person for shelter when there is danger. But this is what's important. When they run to that person for shelter and they find themselves at that person's feet, they then find someone who will lead them with absolute humility and love. That's the difference. So you see, in the sage, both are reconciled. So, very important. So, beautiful verse. Very beautiful verse.